Today I will talk about EQing high gain guitars. One of the key key features of the modeling units like the AxeFx is they offer a shitload of EQs, and in my opinion the EQ is one of the most powerful tools to get a good result with your tone. Of course, it's a lot easier if you have an amp model and a cap or a simulation, IR or whatever is used as a cap emulation, and you have already good sound with these two things. But I think in most cases you will need an additional equalizer after the cap or after the amp block to at least to fine-tune your sound. And therefore it's very important that you know which frequencies have which effect on the guitar tone. So as you can see here in the AxeFx3, there is the amp model currently using the Atomica High, and everything is set at 5 here. But of course you could try to adjust your tone with just the built-in tone stack, the bass, middle and treble control. The major downside of this is that you don't know which frequencies are affected. For example, if you turn down the treble, of course you should hear it somehow. If I play a chord, and yeah, I would say these frequencies which are affected here are around the 2K, but this can be totally different in another amp model. So in other words, this is a fixed built-in frequency band and also a fixed bandwidth which is affected here. And also in some amp models these knobs are affecting each other. So for example, with a dual rectifier, at least with the real amp, if you turn up the treble, then the other bass middle controls, they don't have that much effect anymore. So it's a little bit limiting if you're using these knobs. So what I recommend is to use a graphic EQ, or if you are an expert, you could use the parametric EQ, which is the most flexible of these things. But I think we will start with the graphic EQ because it's a little bit easier for people who are not that familiar. And I would like to explain you which bands have which effect on the tone. So let me turn off this. As you can see here, we have a 7-band graphic EQ, which is located at the output of the amp. So after the power amp, maybe before the signal hits the cap. Of course, you could enter an additional graphic EQ after the cap and the chain here. It would have a similar effect, but we will stay with this EQ here. And as you may know, maybe the guitar is an instrument, especially the high gain guitar, that is mostly living in the mid frequencies. And first of all, you have to understand what are the mid frequencies. And as a rule of thumb, I always tell people, for me the mid frequencies, they are in between maybe 200 Hertz and maybe 3K. That is my personal rule of thumb. And here is where the magic is happening. So I would definitely recommend to use these frequencies and play around with these to find out which effect they have to you or how they sound. The other frequencies, in this 7-band graphic EQ, you have a 100 Hertz fader. This is more or less the bass region, and everything below 100 Hertz is a sub-bass for me, which is not very important for, at least not for the high gain live tones. The sub-bass frequencies, they can be used by pros in a mix to tighten things together, but you have to be very careful with that. and you have to know what to do. So I would definitely recommend to, well, if you're not familiar with sub-bass frequencies, to reduce it rather than to raise it. And yeah, here the 100 Hertz, I'll come to that in a second, is well, the lowest frequency band I would affect in a high-gain guitar tone. Also here you have the 6.4K fader, which is more or less the well, the presence region in this 7-band graphic EQ. That is something which could also can also be annoying at louder volumes. And yeah, I would definitely recommend to lower this. And I think if you will play loud volumes and suddenly your ears start ringing, then it's a good idea to lower these frequencies, and then you will see suddenly it's a little bit more well, pleasant to your ears if you play loud volumes. But the characteristic of your high-gain guitar tones is in between these things. So, as I said, for me between 200 and 3.2K in this case. And of course, in other graphic EQs, for example, here we can also choose an 8-band graphic EQ. You can see the affected frequencies by these faders are slightly different. But the rule is the same, so it's also in between 200 and maybe 3K. And of course here you have to dial in your tone a little bit different than with the 7-band graphic EQ. You can take a more simple EQ, for example the 5-band Mark EQ, which is maybe the emulation of the Mesa EQ 5-band graphic EQ in the Mark amp series, which seems to fit quite well in most high-gain amps. And here you have also, like in the 7-band EQ, these important frequencies, as I call them. So this is the overall mid knob, which is very powerful. And here we have the presence and the sub bass, which should be reduced in most cases. And you have upper mid-range here, the 2.2K, and also the lower mid-range here, the 2.4, 240 Hz. So let's go back to the 7-band graphic EQ, and I will explain you a little bit what these faders are doing. So I'm currently, let's go switch to my rhythm tone. I'm currently playing with this tone, which sounds very full and rich to me. But let's say you would like to have a little bit more more upper mid-range punch, like if you're playing in a metal band and you want to have more well, more percussive elements in your playing. For example, if you're chugging, some people like it if the upper mid-range is a little bit more in your face. And the upper mid-range is usually located around 2K. So in this case, we have only the 1.6K fader and the 3.2K fader in this region. So I think we should start by raising these two faders a little bit, and let's see how it affects the sound. So I will turn off the EQ, it was this sound. And if it is turned on, you can hear maybe there's a little bit more upper mid-range in your face punch. Like Megadeth used it a lot, I think. So around the 2K you have this effect of this upper mid-range. I'll call it Megadeth crunch. And of course you can try out which frequencies, how the frequencies by themselves sound. You can hear the 3.2K fader. It's a little bit too high maybe. And the 1.6K fader might be a little bit too low if you raise it too much, because as you can hear it starts to get honky. But those two together, they seem to fit quite well. And that is another thing I would like to mention. I'd rather try to boost a little bit wider frequency bands than too narrow bands. And that is achieved here by raising these two knobs a little bit, raising these two faders. And as you can hear, if you use only one fader and raise it too much, then suddenly you will create a spike in a narrow frequency band, and you can hear that. And the thing with this is, you don't, in most situations, you don't know how the speaker, where people are hearing your guitar tone, is designed. Especially if you're playing to the front of house, these things, they are not, not really flat sounding. So they all have their a little bit the frequencies which they are a little bit more emphasized, and the frequencies which they don't address so well. And also it's depending on the environment. If you are playing outside, maybe you have concrete floors, then maybe these upper mid-range may sound too much because you get reflections from everywhere and shit like that. Then you have to dial it back. So you should be careful by raising only certain frequencies in a very narrow bandwidth, because this can get very annoying. And then if you do this, then the front of house engineer has to find out the exact place where you raise the frequencies too much. But if you are raising a wider frequency band a little bit, it's not that of a problem in most situations. So here I would definitely recommend to use these two. But we can go to the other EQ and try out maybe what will happen if we raise the 2K here, because the 8-band EQ, as you can see, has a dedicated 2K fader. As you can hear, it's also fitting. I personally prefer the 7-band graphic EQ with Marshall-like tone stacks. They seem to work well with that for some reason. And overall, I definitely recommend to use these things carefully. So in most situations, I don't boost anything or cut anything more than 3 dB. Because 3 dB is a lot if you hear it at loud volumes, trust me. And usually if you have to do more than 3 dB boost, then except for the bass and the top end there, it can be more. But in the mid-range, then maybe you should start before and adjust your amp or your cap, choose a different cap. So that is the upper mid-range region around the 2K. It's the punch region. Then we have the lower mid-range region, which is for me between 200 and 500 hertz. And that region is, it's for me it's maybe the fullness, the body of the tone. And you need these frequencies, or they can be useful if you're playing leads. I can show you that. Maybe I will go to my lead. Usually I'm boosting these frequencies dynamically when I'm playing higher notes, and the faders go up, but I turn this off. So yeah, let's raise the these frequencies a little bit. I will show you. This was the lead tone without the boost. As you can hear, suddenly you have a very fat lead tone, and it doesn't get annoying. And yeah, I think especially the 400 Hz are very usable in that situation for lead tones. The 200 Hz, the lowest lower mids, if you can call it that, they can get annoying, and they can definitely get annoying when you're playing rhythms. For example, if I go back to my rhythm scene and I play rhythms, chugs here. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's a little bit too much in the low mid-range. Maybe the dual rectifier does have a lot of these frequencies, but it's not very helpful in my opinion. So in a rhythm situation, or if you're after a good rhythm tone, I would rather be careful with the 200 Hz. And also with the 400, but the 200 is more dangerous, I think. So overall, they're not that useful for a rhythm tone, but for leads they're very useful, I think, the lower mids. At least I like to boost these things in a lead tone. If you pull up the 400 Hz, you will also get more of a kind of vintage tone, in my opinion. Here. If I lower it, get more of this scooped metal tone, and that brings me to the last region, which is the mids of the mids, as if you can call it like that. These are the 800 Hz here, and that is something. Of course, also the neighbor faders here, the 400 and the 1.6K, but the 800 is maybe the center of the mid, and that is something which is the honkiness region, as I call it. And especially if you like boosting your amp with a tube screamer or with a parametric EQ in front of the amp. In these situations, most people try to boost these regions, the 800 Hz, and then afterwards you have to reduce it because it can get annoying. So I can show you now the effect of the 800 Hz fader. You can hear it sounds honky, honky as hell. And if we reduce it, you're more or less in a metal scoop territory. And yeah, another trick with the equalization is if you don't like some frequencies, or you think maybe the 800 Hz are too loud in the mix, you can reduce it, and then suddenly you may find your sound a little bit scooped. What you can do is, you don't like the 800 Hz, you don't want to raise it, but then you should try to raise maybe the neighbor frequencies a little bit. So in this case, the 400 and the 1.6K. This is a trick which is, well, in some situations it's working, and it's compensating somehow that you're reducing another frequency band. And I think the reason for this is that these faders, they affect frequencies which overlap each other a little bit. So yeah, if you are just lowering the 800 Hz fader, you can imagine it's a little bit of a curve that where the frequencies are lowered. But if you raise these frequencies, So these faders 400 Hz and 1.6K. Then at the at the end of this valley of the 800 Hz, frequencies are boosted a little bit again. So we have maybe a little bit of a narrow frequency band reduced here. Of course, you can do this easier with a parametric EQ, but I will just for keep it simple, I will stay now with the graphic EQ. So, in short, this is the upper mid-range around the 2K, which is a punch. The lower mid-range is, well, it's more or less for the pitch of the note. So if you want to have a full note where you can hear the pitch, I would definitely recommend to boost these frequencies around the 400 Hz. And the center of the mids around the 800 Hz, it's the honkiness region, and this is important, especially if your overall tone is a little bit too mid-focused, maybe because you're boosting in front of the amp and the mids drastically. And yeah, other than that, the 100 Hz fader is the bass, responsible for the bass frequencies. Everything below is something which I'd rather cut or at least reduce drastically. And it's 6.4K. Everything maybe above 3K is for me the presence region. And that is also something you should be careful with, especially in a live situation. The 4K is maybe a little bit helpful if you want to stick out of a mix in a lead situation, but I recommend to let this to the front of house engineer, because it's very depending on the environment, on the overall sound of the venue or where you're playing. But I think in most situations you can dial in a guitar tone you like by using only these regions between 200 Hz and 3K, at least if the bass frequencies and the presence frequencies are not well, out of control. The 100 Hz fader is also powerful if you want to thicken things up in a lead situation. So you can also incorporate this fader when you want to make a fat lead tone. But as I said, you should be aware that everything below 100 Hz is then maybe not helpful. And in my patch, as you can see here, I'm cutting lows somewhere around 27 Hz. Well, that is not maybe here. You can see it. I have a graphic EQ. I'm cutting a lows at 52 Hz and also in a very high slope. So yeah, the lows are cut it anyway below 50 Hz, 52 Hz. And yeah, you should make sure that you don't raise these frequencies here too much. Another thing is, which is of course important, you have to find the right graphic EQ for your purpose. And that is something I said before. I tried to, or I found out that maybe the 7-band graphic EQ addresses frequencies which fit good with Marshall-like tone stacks. The 5-band graphic EQ from the Mark series has similar frequencies. It's a little bit easier to dial in. So here you have the center of the mids in the 750 Hz fader. And if you use this, I would recommend to start with it. Maybe dial out a little bit for more scoop tone. And yeah, the other thing, you can raise this knob to get more punch. And this fader for getting a fatter lead. Here you can maybe adjust your scissor. And here your bass. In my opinion, these are not the correct frequencies. And they're somehow affecting a little bit different frequency bands, because if you try to dial this in with a parametric EQ, it sounds completely different. So this thing has a certain secret behavior which nobody knows except maybe Mesa or maybe FractalAudio. And yeah, if you're not familiar with graphic EQs, maybe you could start with an easier one, maybe this one. I recommend, it's very easy to use. And of course, if you are maybe already happy, you say you don't have too much bass or high end, just maybe overall you would like to reduce the mids a little bit, then you could also start with an even easier one, like the 3-band passive EQ, or I personally like the 3-band console EQ. And here you can just reduce the overall mids in a very wide frequency range. So this is maybe like an addition to your tone stack in the amp with other built-in frequencies. So I hope this helps you to get a first insight into my my thinking about these frequencies. And if you have questions, post them below in the comment section. Hope to see you soon. Bye.